Good afternoon to everyone on Eastern Time, and good morning to everybody else. My name is Will Patch. I'm Senior Enrollment Insights Leader of Higher Ed here at Niche. I'm going to let our two guests today introduce themselves. We're going to try to keep things. We got a lot of questions come in advance, so I'm excited to get into this conversation. So, Lauren, if you want to kick us off with an intro.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren Griswold. I'm Chief Communications and Marketing Officer at Boise State University.
Great. And Kelsey?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelsey Stockton. I'm a strategist with Campus Sonar.
All right. Thank you. Well, we're going to be talking about sort of that intersection and maybe where there should be more intersection between the athletics brand and the institutional brand. Little piece of housekeeping here. I love seeing everyone come in, introducing themselves in the chat. That's a great way you can meet each other there. Right away, you'll see your chat on the right-hand side. That's where you can all interact with each other. On the Q&A tab, you can submit questions. We'll get to those at the end. There are some that came in. I've already put in from the initial registration form. Yes, this is all being recorded. You'll get the recording and some additional information tomorrow. So happy to get that out. I know that's always the most asked question. But one thing, as we start to dive in here, I want to get your takes on my first question. And this all came about, to give everyone some background here, AMA Higher Ed in Chicago this past fall. I went to two different sessions that felt like there was a lot of overlap between Lauren's great session about the brand work they've done, really bringing Boise State together with the institutional identity and bringing it into the rest, the athletics identity, bringing it into the rest of the institution. And then there was another session with Campus Sonar. It was Liz Gross actually doing the session, and it was a great conversation around sort of the athletics conversations and how they play into the institutional identity. So I want to ask you two, how are you defining? Because I have my ideas leaning into the athletics identity versus leaning on the athletics identity.
Yeah, so I can jump in with that one, Will. Thanks for the question. For us, athletics is the front porch to our university, like many universities around the country. And what you may know, for all those who are watching, is we have some iconic blue turf on our football field. And so for us, it was really about finding a way to leverage that national recognition from our athletic side and to show the innovation that came from that blue turf and the excellence that takes place on our football field and tie it to our academics. So we have one of the lowest go-on rates from high school to college in the country. I think we're number 2 lowest in the United States, with a very high population of first-generation students. So athletics is really that welcome mat for folks to have that entree into the university. So that the affinity that they have for our athletics teams is really that the first step for us to make that relationship with those individuals and help them learn more about the academic excellence of the university. So it was kind of a no-brainer for us. We knew that a lot of people know about that blue turf and they love it here in Idaho. So for us, it was just trying to figure out how do we build the bridge between those two.
Yeah. Kelsey, how would you define it from the listening standpoint?
Sure. So I think Lauren makes a great point with it being the front porch to a campus. So you have athletics obviously driving a lot of awareness and exposure pretty regularly throughout local communities, state communities, national presence, depending on your programs. And so you have this audience who's already has some familiarity, and they start to build some of those different assumptions about your campus based on what they're seeing through athletics. So factoring that in, and then also looking at the amount of involvement, engagement that happens internally with athletics programs, it's such a good opportunity really to integrate that campus messaging and find ways to integrate that to tell more about your campus values, to tell more about what are your priorities, what do you care about. So you've already got an audience that's interested in coming into that space, but finding ways to weave that together, whether through academics, like Lauren mentioned, or finding some of those other community service, involvement, leadership components, really finding ways to tie that in a way that's familiar and draws your audience in closer. So I think that's where leaning into versus just relying on. Anybody can just push out content on athletics all the time. We see some accounts where it's just constantly score updates and conference standings and things like that. But how do you really pull that together in a storytelling capacity to let people know what you care about and what you want them to know about your institution?
Yeah, I like those. I like those definitions. And just to drive this point home, everyone out there, just use one of the reactions at the bottom of your screen if you've ever heard of an institution first by their athletics name, right? You'd never heard of the school before, and then you see them in March Madness and a tournament somewhere. You see, exactly. I mean, this is the front door for us, and we see these schools all the time. We're more likely to know an institution than a 16-year-old in rural Indiana, right? All right. Well, Lauren put together some great slides here to kind of go over what their whole approach looks like. So I'll leave it over to you here.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background because ours was really a data-driven approach. We partnered with Simpson Scarborough, a national agency, to help us with this work. And we conducted market research for prospective students, current students, parents, alumni, and then the general population of Idaho. And we really wanted to build a framework and a brand platform to help bring the excellence of our football program and what people know about our blue turf with the excellence of our academics. And so this is the result of months of research together, but it's the framework that we use, our brand platform, that helps us really define our storytelling and our content strategy. And is that kind of compass for the North Star for all of our campus partners. We have 100 plus marketers across campus. So how do we all start integrating this together? What does that look like? So we do it through research, and we do it through that brand platform. So this is just a sneak peek so you can kind of take a look at what the personality traits are of what it means to be a Bronco, what our pillars are, which are related to our blue turf thinking, and then unpacking that blue turf thinking as it relates to academics. We know our strategic drivers are areas of excellence that are going to win every time when we create content with our audiences. And so that is kind of those foundational elements of our recipe for how we build our overall strategies. So after that, if you want to jump to the next slide, Will, we launched our campaign last February. We've had it out in the market about a year with paid campaigns to, at first, just to have overall brand share within our marketplace. So our university had never actually done a large paid media campaign at the brand level. We'd had paid media through our admissions, paid media through our online admissions. We'd had trades with paid media for athletics, but at the brand level for the overall university, we had never gone out to market. So we took our brand platform, we worked with Simpson Scarborough, we created various assets for paid media, including a new institutional spot, which we'll show in just a moment, a landing page, a campaign landing page, and then we'll show results, those results of how we're trying to drive folks through our enrollment funnel. So we're starting at the very top, like blue turf thinking, out of the blue, Boise State University. What does that mean? We're being really intentional with tying in what athletics looks like with academic excellence. I think also really trying to personalize the people, our athletes, our student athletes, to our audience. So humanizing them, telling their story, making them more than just the sport, unpacking who they are on and off the court or off the field. So this is just an example of our campaign landing page, blue.boisestate.edu. You can take a peek. And then this is our paid media and what our paid media looks like out in the marketplace. So surround sound is how we describe it. It's all of the touch points that people have with us through various types of channels. So social media, web, out of home, airport, banners. how do you take this overall theme, this overall framework, and start to craft messaging that's going to connect to those audiences? We call it our earned and then our owned strategy. If you want to take a look at the next slide. We have also our own channels. So while paid is really important, we also know that placements and media relations placements are really important. And some of you may not have media relations in your portfolio, but some of you probably do, like myself. And so how do we take the stories then of those folks that we highlight within our marketing and our very polished marketing efforts, our paid media efforts, and then pitch them to local outlets so that we have those earned opportunities too, that deeper storytelling that isn't just about that athlete or the sport, but is actually about that person. And then finally, we have our results. So this is just, you can look kind of a year comparison over the last year. Our first time in the market was really brand heavy, not so much focused on our funnel. We are maturing our marketing model right now and building a more intentional funnel. And that's what you'll start to see within those fall months to this spring. But overall, you can see some of the success having 330 applicants just from our landing page. We're not at the point right now. We're getting closer to individually tagging our leads so that if we're seeing what's out in the market related to this, we can then be sure to tie them back to seeing that advertising into the success. But this is directly from our campaign landing page, which we're pretty proud of. And it's helped us increase our enrollment over the last year. So we were up 7% this fall with our Idaho students, and we're trending for 6% up for next fall as of right now.
I love that. That is completely counter to the trends you're seeing nationally.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we're going to show you what one of the videos that goes with this campaign looks like. And I have to say, I've seen this now when we were prepping for this, as well as at AMA Higher Ed. I'm not from Idaho. I didn't go to Boise State. I get so excited seeing this video.
Thank you.
I think it really says a lot about really that integration and the energy it can bring. So let's take a look at that.
Thank you.
Matlock, underrated recruit, has built himself into one of the best defensive players in the Mountain West.
What would you do if you couldn't fail? Would you see every setback as a catalyst to keep going? This is the innovator's mindset, because innovation demands daring. It's finding thousands of ways that don't work, and the one that changes everything. It's when your unrelenting spirit sees the world's needs and says, I will create something better. So, what will you do? Will you let your genius run wild? Give yourself the space to be great? Set your sights on something even bigger, because we know changing the world doesn't happen by chance. It comes out of the blue.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I have to give a shout out. So we worked with Simpson Scarborough and Bowstring Productions on our spot, and we're really proud of the results. So I highly recommend both.
Yeah. And it's great that you saw clearly there was that academic voice and brand layered in with the student life, the extracurriculars layered in with this athletic identity that people would already associate and know. So we'll get to one of the first questions here that we want to ask. How do you think about the integration of institutional and athletic brands? How did you go about sort of tying these together?
Absolutely. No, that's a really great question. It really takes a lot of buy-in from your leadership as well, and a desire for you to bring these two areas of campus together. At Boise State, we view ourselves not as separate entities, but really as one university. And you can't have one without the other. You can't be a Boise State fan for one of our sports and not be a fan of the work and the impact of the university. So that first and foremost is something that's really important. Also, you really can't ignore data and what the data is telling you. And through our market research, what we found was through our quant and qualitative analysis is that our athletics brand through social listening, Kelsey pulled up some numbers as well that she can share. It is above and beyond, has the most engagement out in the market right now. And so for us to not lean into that is really, I think, kind of a mistake. But it's important to be really intentional. We're one brand, and that's really important for us at Boise State. We're not two brands. We're not the athletic side and the campus side of the house. So going and conducting that market research, making sure that it's a data-driven approach is really important and impactful as well. And then I think, too, at the end of the day, your student athletes are students first. It's student and then athlete. And so that connection it's a natural connection that there's anyway, that you can make. And it's really about finding the people that you want representing the brand. Like for us, we looked at people's individual stories, and we took that framework that I showed a little bit earlier to determine, are they representing the personalities that represent a Bronco? Do they, is it ingrained in them, that blue turf thinking? And then are they connected to that foundational element of our strategic drivers that we know that win every time? So when you map back those 5 brand heroes that we featured, our athletes and then our other students, there's a really seamlessness with them. And there's been a lot of great engagement from our audiences because they hit on all of those marks that our market research said was important for folks.
Yeah. And you really do often see there's the athletic silo of this is only usable by athletics, and the academic institutional of this is only usable by us. So, yeah. Next question up here. What sort of an impact has it made to lean into what people already knew and loved and welcome them into that institutional brand?
Well, I have an anecdotal answer to that. So we did a sneak preview with our foundation board for our institutional spot. And it was a big deal to launch a new spot and to go out into the market. We have the population of the state of Idaho is smaller than the city of Los Angeles. So it's a pretty small community here, and people are really proud of the university. And so there's a lot of pressure, right? When everybody's like waiting for that commercial to come out and hopes that it's going to represent them as well. And when we presented it to our foundation board, we had an alum who came up to me after our presentation. So it's a room of a couple hundred people. And he had graduated, decades ago. And he said he'd never been more proud to be an alum of Boise State University because he felt like it just represented him and where the university is going. And for us, those are the kinds of things. That's just one example of the number of people that have come up to us, parents, students, our employees, business partners in the community. It's really been a sense of pride for everybody, not only who is currently at Boise State or an alum, but affiliated with the university as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, Kelsey, you put together some slides on the data and the listening and how people can really do a more intentional job of figuring out what's already being said. How do we integrate with that?
Sure. Thanks, Will. So to introduce Campus Sonar, if anyone's joined us today and isn't familiar with our approach, we're a campus partner that works with campuses to think about the best ways to leverage audience insights to have really audience-centric approach to enrollment strategy, brand strategy, institutional strategy. And so part of how we do that is by applying higher ed expertise and a social listening research approach to look at online conversation and understand where your audience is at and what they're saying about your campus. So when we were starting doing some of this work, part of what we do is we will segment out some of that conversation to see, here's what your admissions audience is talking about. Here's what your alumni are talking about. And a lot of campuses had asked us, in different ways, oh, athletics sometimes drowns us out. There's so much athletics conversation. How do we really silo that non-athletics piece? And really seeing it more as kind of a noise factor. While there's certainly value to sectioning that out, we've really seen over time that athletics just plays an undeniable influence in that campus brand. So for campuses of all different sizes and institutional types, typically over half of your conversation is going to be athletics driven in some capacity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So as we mentioned at the start of this meeting, there are definitely ways that athletics becomes that front door of your institution. It's high level of exposure. It's engaging people across demographics and age groups. And so leveraging that and incorporating that into your approach lets you just be more strategic and proactive about the role that conversation can play. So as we navigate through these slides, there's a link that we can share out as well, which is for our Campus Sonar Athletics Playbook. So this is looking at some of these different findings and statistics, as well as strategies that you can leverage into your conversation approach. But as I reference these, just know that these are available and we'll be happy to get these to you. So when we think about the role that this online conversation plays, it's March. It's a favorite time of year for many a school with a basketball program, particularly those who might be tournament bound. And so looking at the ways that conversation can spike or grow throughout the year, you don't need to have a championship level team to have a high amount of athletics conversation. We see a high amount happening across Division 1, 2, and 3. And overall, recognizing that schools that have the athletics programs typically have a 236% increase in total online conversation volume. So that's really significant. And if you're ignoring that, it really limits some of your opportunities, which we'll continue to touch on. One of the nice value adds for athletics is it typically is increasing positive sentiment. So for the most part, people are excited. They want to rally around a team, around a campus identity. And so people are generally happier in a lot of ways to be there, even if they might be critical at times of the tough losses or the rivalries that come up. But even when we look at some of our admissions related conversation, a lot of campuses, their admissions conversation comes from student athletes who are going through the recruitment and commitment process. And so those students also tend to be more positive in how they're talking about their admissions decisions, and they tend to have a good amount of visibility. There are some student athletes in the recruitment process who have an incredible following on their different social profiles, and they're engaging their local communities and some broader sports audiences as well. So really, I'd say the biggest thing that we see from the listening approach is having that proactive effort can really go a long way. We routinely are working with campuses about brand fragmentation. And for those of you who've been on campuses, really probably for the last 10, 15 years of the social media boom in particular, part of our work is we work with campuses to go through and see all those different accounts. I think our record at this point is finding a campus with over 1,000 different social media accounts, which might be, an Instagram account for a student club that started and abandoned their platform after a few days. It might be Twitter X profiles for every club sports team you have. You may have faculty and thought leaders, but that's a lot of presence diluting your brand in different ways. So when you have a stronghold that has a pretty cohesive vision, you usually have some really strong marketers in athletics areas. That's a great partnership opportunity to really tie together two strong aspects of your core campus brand and your athletics core campus brand to pull that together in a way that you're strengthening that approach. So with that, finding those opportunities to pull the messaging together helps your community feel like it's more tight knit. It makes it feel like people know what's going on both sides of the house. And so it's a great way to be able to align some of those values in your storytelling. Typically, too, with some of the athletics opportunities, there's some great ways to use that lens for storytelling. So Lauren made some great points about taking a student-first approach to the work that they're doing, and that's something I really love about the new campaign that Boise State's running, is it's not just here's one of our football players. It's, here's our student athletes as they go into the classroom. Here's our student athletes as they're engaging with other peers on campus. And so not everybody is going to go to Boise State and be a football player. Many would probably love to be, but realistically, it's a smaller population, but it might have a really significant impact to a student who shares a classroom space or becomes friends with somebody on the team, or maybe lives down the hall from somebody who has that experience. So those student athletes can have a really big impression or influence on that student experience. And so being able to tell stories that center those students and show that there's more to them than just what people see on the field is a great way to tie in those campus values and to the Boise State example, what it means to be a Bronco. So as I mentioned, if you ignore athletics, it really can be a missed opportunity. There typically tends to be a lot of great opportunities to generate admissions interest as well as campus revenue. So we often look at some of the ways in which athletics can bring revenue. And so certainly there's the obvious layers of selling tickets and merchandise and partnerships. But even in terms of looking at programs that have some of those higher profile moments or start to leverage that into their core branding, that can lead to stronger applications. It can lead to increased applications, alumni engagement and donations, but also just general popularity and awareness so that people are more familiar with who you are. It piques that interest earlier often. And so being able to build upon that relationship over time. We also see that there's a lot of topics in the news. And so in this particular report, we looked at June of 21 to 22. And so there were some very common themes in national news coverage around higher ed. And even when you look at topics like freedom of speech, Title IX, equity, diversity, and inclusion, athletics plays a key role in all of those different spaces. So those conversations are not happening in a silo or separately from the rest of athletics. So finding ways, again, to strengthen those relationships and be really intentional about that integration can, again, show that cohesive branding and approach. And then a few final points that I'll share for right now is just really thinking about this throughout the year. I think that again, I mentioned, heading into March Madness, it's tournament time. And sometimes we see schools that are like, oh, we should figure this out because we are actually on a hot streak right now. But you want to be building this out over the course of the year. So you want to make sure that you have good relationships. The schools, I think that we see this the best, it really is a top-down initiative to merge these areas. We hear at times from different campus partners who are not formally seated within athletics that sometimes athletics can be an intimidating space. There might be concerns around some of the compliance pieces or just stepping into a space that's not their area of expertise. So really when you can have a leadership-driven approach to make sure that there's good collaboration and relationships across team members and colleagues, I think that can go a long way in terms of sharing stories and just being coordinated about the different ways that you might leverage some of those different moments. So for instance, if you have a key rivalry, even if you're not a school that sees yourself as a strong athletic powerhouse, you probably have a rivalry somewhere. And so those instances come up over time. And by collaborating across different units and communicators, you can figure out like who might capture more the alumni lens on that rivalry, who's going to capture, featuring about the current students in the matchup, who's going to be talking about the event itself. There's different ways to get at that while telling more about your campus, telling more about your campus community, getting people to feel something about your campus and bringing that in together. So really, I'd say it starts early. It's a great time to start in the off season for some of your peak sports is to really start building that relationship throughout the year. And that way, if you do have that championship moment or that Cinderella story that comes up, you're ready to hit the ground running. But overall, it helps your audience become more aware of you and pulls them in. So that way, when they are locked in on some of those big moments, they already have that other relationship with you that keeps them coming back to your other spaces as well.
Great. There was a sage advice once that you need to stop, collaborate, and listen. So I think that fits in well with this. And on that embarrassing transition, uh, well, we have another question here for you. And there were several versions of this that came in. So we'll just kind of answer all of them at once here. But what are some of the similarities and differences and how this would work for a smaller regional D3 school? A lot of the questions around, well, how does this look as we're looking at different sizes of schools and different levels of athletics? What are you seeing there, Kelsey?
Yeah. I would say resources obviously comes to mind, that some schools are going to have more resources than others in terms of staffing, in terms of how you might operationally be setting up some of your approach with some of the communications and marketing that are happening. But overall, we see a lot of engagement across all those different levels. I mentioned that we still see over 50% of conversation, regardless if you're D1, D2, or D3 for schools. And there's different ways that we see some of those stories come through. One thing I think is good to keep in mind, we had featured this recently in one of our blog posts, but when you look at the numbers, roughly at a D1 institution, roughly 1 in 23 students are student athletes. When you look at a D3 school, it's typically more 1 in 4. And so having recently been at a conference too with some smaller and small mid-sized schools that were talking a bit about athletics, there is that sense of a really rich athletics community. There's that sense that student athletes know each other and play an important role in terms of the fabric of campus and the student experience. And so I think that's especially where you see some really great storytelling opportunities. And it's a good opportunity to branch beyond, maybe you're a known football school or a basketball school, or you have an excellent gymnastics team. There's so many other teams on campus. There's so many other different ways that athletics plays a role. So going beyond those really obvious stories to be able to tell some deeper moments, like maybe you have students who are really involved in community engagement. Maybe you have some coaches that are alumni who've come back because they really believe in the institution and its values. And what does that mean? And what is that story there? So lots of different opportunities to be able to engage. But like I mentioned, we do talk with schools sometimes who are like, we're not an athletic school. And we'll look at their conversation. We're like, well, people on the internet think you are. Like, even if it's not something that you consider yourself to be known for, there are still people who care about these student athletes. They care about what's happening. They want to be along on that journey. So it does vary a bit. I think to Lauren's point, I had looked up some numbers earlier as we were chatting, and Boise State conversation, for instance, at one point was about 90% athletics driven. So it makes perfect sense for Boise State to be leveraging and leaning into athletics in terms of how they tell their story. But we do see smaller programs that might have a bit more of a mix, but they still are around that 50, 60% more often than not.
Great. What are some ways that colleges are currently integrating the two sides of the house or seats at the table, whatever analogy we want to use? And what are some opportunities to improve that you're seeing?
Yeah, I was just functionally, I was just chatting with someone recently who was talking about how they were really glad that they had started early and during the quiet time of year to partner with athletics, and they work more in the central marketing area. And they were talking about how they've just developed a good relationship where they're able to share different digital assets. They're able to talk about stories. They coordinate who's running what and when so that they're not stepping on each other. But they also have, I think you see good crossover in their content around, say, mascot presence, for instance, and using similar language. So if you have a slogan that, like blue turf thinking, if you see that coming across in both core messaging as well as athletics messaging, that starts to pull that together again, and your audience starts to pick up on that this is something for the whole campus, not just for part of campus. In terms of content, I think that's where you can see some of those storytelling opportunities where athletics might lean themselves in-house with a more athletics first lens, and that makes sense for different moments. But from the university side, great way to tie it into brand campaigns, into campus values, and really thinking about how are the people who are involved in making these programs happen, serving as ambassadors and representatives of the institution.
Great. This one, this question that comes up, and if you have questions, be sure to drop those in the Q&A on the side. You can upvote questions, and we'll get through as many as we can here. I know this is a pretty interesting topic. Got a lot of questions coming in. How can I leverage our university's live mascot? In this case, it's a greyhound. Everyone loves those dog mascots.
Love
for
it.
both brands. I mean, sometimes you'll see the horse come on. Sometimes you'll see.
We have a live mascot too, but it's a horse.
Yep.
So I don't get to leverage our live mascot in the same ways that you could a greyhound. So I would be really excited about this. The things that I initially think of are identifying key milestone moments in your student journey where you can bring your mascot and incorporate it into those like the welcome events for freshmen when they're on campus. Our students all go to on the football field and they form our logo B.
Mm.
The first day here, it's part of their Bronco welcome. So I would see, is there an opportunity to bring your mascot where you're creating some type of tradition every year where students get to meet that mascot? And then if you think of, I like to think everything through a story arc of a journey. So closing it out at commencement. Is there an opportunity then to close them out where the Greyhound is sending them off out into the world, like as they're entering into the auditorium for graduation with their pomp and circumstance, or as they're exiting after they've left the stadium? So it doesn't have to be like that visible of a moment where everybody knows that the Greyhound is present, but maybe it's that like high touch point moment where students actually get to, pet your mascot as they're walking by. We can't do that with a horse. I'm a little jealous. But those are just a couple things that come to mind that I think could be really fun, where you're probably going to get people interested to want to go to games because they like that mascot. Usually they like the mascot the most, more than any player.
Yeah. Everyone loves that mascot, especially when they're pettable. All right. This one, I think we've answered the first part, but I'm really interested in that second and both of your takes on that. Is this only working for D1 institutions or colleges with storied winning teams? Do they have to have a winning team, Kelsey, for you to see that positive sentiment?
No, I don't think so. And especially there's different ways too that programs are being recognized. So, for instance, I think one achievement, for instance, that stands out to me recently was the NCAA recently awarded Oberlin College an award for being a very inclusive campus, and I think that really speaks a lot to how people look and perceive a place like Oberlin College to be. And so it was a nice way that it was pulling together some athletic stories and themes, but showing the way that the program is capturing campus values. They have some really strong student athletes on campus, but typically people don't jump to athletics when they're thinking about the programs that Oberlin is most known for. You also, I think, see for programs that are on the rise, there's some different opportunities. So last year, Quinnipiac University won the National Hockey Championship right after UConn won the National Basketball Championship. And so there was this big focus in the Connecticut space. And obviously UConn's continued to be for a long time a basketball powerhouse. But Quinnipiac has had a strong hockey program, but like having that championship moment, we are able to see too, like where just conversation grew and evolved over time, where it's not, back-to-back repeats. It's not something where you're just, expecting certain teams to come in and sweep. And so again, that idea of proactively being ready to leverage and kind of capitalize on those moments to make sure that you have the messaging in place that you want to share. There are those opportunities available both for, I think, athletic success on the field, but also, or on the ice in that case, but also like the stories of behind the scenes and like operationally, like how programs are run, the culture, and the different attitudes of people in those programs.
Yeah. And I feel like anytime you have that winning moment or the Cinderella story of this low ranked team who's all of a sudden doing great, you see these spikes in applications and everything else. Are you prepared for that in advance? Right? Do you have the assets in place first to link these people who know your name now and tell them why you're a great academic institution as well?
That's huge, I think. And that's where especially we had done a feature, I'm going to forget if it was 2 years ago, I believe, that St. Peter's went on a run and everybody was like Googling peacock mascots and trying to figure out where St. Peter's was and following along. And so that can be an instance where all of a sudden, almost overnight, your conversation just drastically changes. And so if people are going to find you, like, what are the most recent messages that are available? Are they the messages you want to have in place? And so even just strategically planning, okay, when somebody new comes into our space, what what is that information or that moment going to be? Is it something that's very much like an inside joke? Is it something inviting them in? Is it something that says who we are and what we care about?
Yeah. And we see that in traffic to niche profiles too. When a college is doing really well, traffic spikes. People are looking them up. They want to say, "Oh, I know this name now," but then they want to see what are they like academically. What are students saying? How much does it cost? Of course, things like that. Uh, Always have to have the data, right? We both hit on the data here. Uh, what are some of the evidence and examples of leveraging athletics to achieve cross-institutional goals? Lauren, you have some firsthand right off the bat there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look at when our teams win on or off the field, there's a spike in applications. And so we know that as we're, to Kelsey's point, making sure that we have the content available for them when they're landing on our page, that if we're leveraging the athletics brand, we're ready in those moments when they are winning, that we're then putting them in communication flows and journeys that are hopefully going to help us on the prospective student side. We also utilize our coaches and our athletic director out in the community a lot. There's definitely a community relations aspect to this that brings people closer to the individual and helps them build that affinity as well. And so it's also about how you take almost the celebrity of those folks and the notoriety of those folks. Our coaches are usually really inspirational and people want to hear from them. They're so interested in, not only how they're thinking about their season, but what they think about the community and bringing them to those groups. So if they're speaking at chamber events, or we had speak to our state legislature folks, and that helps us as we're thinking of our budget season. So there's lots of different ways to actually tie it in together and to integrate. It's just about being really intentional about it. Our athletics team actually has a content and strategic communications strategist who pitches stories about students off the field and coaches off the field and the work that they're doing in the classroom, in labs, once they're alumni, out in the community. And so that's really important too, because it shows those outcomes that people may have seen them on the field. They may have seen them playing on the court, but now that they know that they're in their community working for a local company and a business and that they're successful, that's exciting to them as well. And so it's just another way to demonstrate excellence at the university, but through the vessel of an athlete or sport.
Yeah. Kelsey, what are you seeing when we're talking about the evidence and examples of success?
Yeah, the application numbers, I think, is really tangible for a lot of schools. I think from thinking back to my days on campuses, sometimes I think other campus partners at times can feel a bit, not frustrated, but overlooked sometimes, or think like, oh, athletics gets all of these different resources. But it's true, the stronger the program you have, or the more exposure you can get in different ways, like it does typically have a positive effect on your admissions applications. And so one of the more recent examples that come to mind there is in 2018 when University of Maryland, Baltimore County upset University of Virginia in the first round. That was a case where they had been increasing their applications about 3% in the years prior to that, and then they grew their population by 18% following that case. So not that they all came because of that, but it does create some different buzz and excitement. And I think the other piece, or another piece to consider here, is it gets your alumni excited too when they're able to relate to some of the content and stories that are coming out. We know from the social listening side that especially in forum spaces like Reddit, alumni can have a huge influence in terms of answering admissions related questions. So we'll see prospects or family members go into forums and ask, hey, what are your thoughts here? And alumni are almost always among the first to chime in with their opinions. So the more you can build up that relationship and enthusiasm, that also pays back really positively in terms of how you're creating these unofficial ambassadors for a campus.
Yeah. Well, I'll put this one to you first here, Kelsey. How can a small university market a niche athletic program outside of our typical enrollment models? It takes explain, but makes perfect sense to students who understand it. In this case, they were talking about their snow sports programs, but it could be a number of very small niche programs.
Yeah, I think there's a few different ways to do that. When you're thinking about, well, in particular, I think, again, going back to earlier in our conversation, the student first approach, I think there's just ways that student athletes who are coming into campus continue to have relationships with people who've supported them throughout their journeys. They tend to know peers who are maybe involved in the same types of sports, for instance. They have followings within their communities and families and friends. And so finding ways to lift up those student stories creates those relatable moments to be able to show what's happening. There's some really cool sports programs that like just don't always get a lot of attention. And so
Mhm.
being able to lift those up and celebrate them as well can show some differentiation too for your campus if it's a program that's a bit more limited or less available. But Lauren made a point about, when you have televised content, for instance, that can be a different level of exposure. So I think on the flip side, for smaller universities or for some of those more niche programs that you're trying to think about ways to position, that's where like your core accounts can really be a huge asset in terms of people are coming to learn about the campus. So it can go both ways. It's not just using athletics to support the core of the institution, but also using the core messaging to support the athletics program as well. So really having that collaboration there, just to lift up that awareness and engagement and celebrate those achievements.
Yeah. You have any thoughts in addition there, Lauren?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, I think it really comes down to your own channel strategy as well. So,
Mhm.
if you have opportunities on your web or your social media to feature and bring awareness to what those maybe niche athletic programs and sports might be and those student athletes, I think that's a fun way to do it. For us, we start at our polished in the market paid media, you know, individuals are brand heroes. But then once we get to our own channels and we're telling that story, if we're telling it a way where it's in that person's voice, sometimes it's through video, sometimes it's through an interview, whatever that may look like. And it's more authentic. It's from in their words. And so I think like it's just about how you try to build engagement and interest with who they are as people. Because it comes down to everybody has a story. You just have to figure out what it is and find a compelling way to share it.
Yeah.
One thing I would just briefly add there too, I love your point about the owned content strategy, because something that we
Mhm.
at times will see when we're working with campuses is a lot of people have different ways to capture campus names. So some campuses like to use the formal names, some like to use acronyms, some like to use nicknames. So I think even having to some of that cohesion across those different programs, it's not uncommon that we'll see within an athletic program, different teams will have their own accounts. But if make it easy for people to find out what's going on, make it easy for people to get where you want them to go and help lead them there. So if there's those collaborative opportunities, but also just even from naming familiarity, that's just a huge opportunity that we see and something that maybe over time people have come in and out and changed roles. And so you might see, Boise State University, BSU, like there's different ways. And I think that's where you just want to make sure, like, how do we want people to know to find us and can they easily get there? Because if it's too hard, they're not gonna do it. They're not gonna get there.
Yep. It was always fun writing social at a school whose initials are MU because that feels like every other college out there is somehow an MU. Uh, this was a really interesting question. I think Kelsey, you have some good information here. But what are some examples of a school with a spirit brand that isn't necessarily built through athletics? I know we're focusing on athletics, but I think when you get to the core of it, there's that affinity and that excitement and that sense of spirit around athletics.
Yeah, I will admit I phoned a friend on this one when I saw this question because I thought it was really great, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what schools come to mind. And so I did
Mhm.
pitch this out to our team a little bit to see who comes to mind, and we had a good conversation about Jackson State's Sonic Boom of the South getting a lot of attention recently, sometimes more so than the athletic programs, and so that's really great exposure where you can have a spirit group that may transcend or exceed some of the athletics identity that goes into it. But also there's different schools and programs that have, for instance, a strong fraternity or sorority life program or campus traditions that are really rooted in more of the campus focus versus athletics. And so there's ways to do that. certainly there's schools that don't have athletics programs, like some of our art schools or some with health sciences focuses that might not be supporting athletics programs. They still find traditions. When I was at Bowling Green State University for graduate school too, I thought it was interesting that the spirit programs were hosted in the Dean of Students office. I think now they're through Student Life or Student Involvement. And so we tend to think about all of those being housed in athletics, but by putting those functionally into spaces like student involvement, it also creates it more as, this isn't just for sports, this is for the campus, this is for the broader community, and there's different ways for the campus to access some of those spirit traditions. So some of it's about structurally where you place them, but also really just creating that momentum and excitement around some traditions.
I loved your Jackson State example, and Alonda Thomas is brilliant. She's their AVP of Common Marketing, and seeing them at the Super Bowl was pretty amazing. So I think that is like the prime example
Yep.
of getting to see their marching band. That was an incredible moment.
Absolutely. And Lauren, I'll put this question to you here. We think of video as being so core to this. So someone asked, how much video expertise do I need to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's varying degrees. It depends on, what your plan is. Is it owned? Is it an owned channel strategy? Is it an earned channel strategy? If you're going to be putting money into it, definitely budgeting for video, I think, is important. I saw there was another question about budget in general. And, we're a state institution. We don't have multi-millions of dollars that we're spending either. As I said, we hadn't been in the market. When I arrived, we were in a different type of marketing model where media relations was really the push here. And I've shifted us towards a more contemporary marketing model that's driven through sales and engagement. So video, that's just one area of investment that you could make. I mean, we have student workers. I have one full-time video person and one student worker, and they create all of our assets for us, except for our institutional spot. Our institutional spot, we generally do every 3 years. So we budget out for that in anticipation that we're going to be using a production company. For us, the reason that it's such a big budget item is as part of our deal with our athletic conference, we have trade with advertising. So we don't pay for the spots that you see with our televised games. Those are part of the trade. That's all part of the deal. But for us, because it is a national audience many times, we really want to invest in that. So it's really about putting your best foot forward. But for our other things, we're working on an update on our paid media. We used the work that we did with Simpson Scarborough last year, and we just held our own photo shoot and video shoot 2 weeks ago with 5 new individuals that we're featuring, and our video person did it on their own. So I think it's utilizing the resources you have. If you don't know how to do something, finding a student. I'll tell you what, our students are very tech savvy and are probably making videos even if it's not their major. So you can definitely find someone who has experience and who can do something pretty special for you that is of high enough standard that you can put it out in the market.
Yeah. It might sound strange, but some of those student workers that you can get, you'd never be able to afford to hire once they graduate.
We have one right now on our staff. Yep.
Yeah. I know we're getting a little tight on time here. I want to be respectful. Are you guys, can you stay a couple minutes after if we want to get to all these? I don't know what meeting schedules look like, but all right. This question came in. How can you highlight athletics without appearing as if you're overlooking other programs or departments that are non-athletic?
This is a great question. So I think there is a tension traditionally between academics and athletics. And you definitely have the body of faculty a lot of times who are like, athletics, why are we promoting that? So we've really taken a lot of time to really talk to our faculty, to talk about the data that we see. I mean, to Kelsey's point, 90% of our conversation online is about athletics. And so how we working with our faculty senate, talking with them about how that's the front porch to the university. So demonstrating the excellence in that can also be a tie into the excellence of the university. You can't feature every single program. It's just not possible when you're doing something at the brand level. And so what I would suggest you do is to look at the key priorities for the university. Talk to the president or leadership to learn what are some of those areas of focus that you're trying to gain enrollment in, you're trying to gain recognition in. For us, I asked our president if you could choose one thing, what is the one area? And she said engineering. So as I was looking at the portfolio of individuals that we were going to possibly feature, I made sure that we had an engineering student and an engineering faculty member. Similarly, we did the same thing this year. What is it that we're, hoping to showcase? Excellence in nursing. So we found a nursing student that had a really incredible story as well. So I think it's really, you're never going to be able to feature everybody. You have to pick something, and it should be strategic. So looking at what the university's priorities are, thinking about growth, thinking about areas of excellence, because it's really about getting someone interested to learn more. And that's where your more sophisticated communication journeys come in, and your other paid media strategies come in.
Yeah. Kelsey, any thoughts there? Or?
I just echo the focus on leadership and strategic priorities. I think it really needs to be top down. The priorities really need to be clearly stated at the top of the organization, so people can feel like there's an understanding, and it's not just a social media manager who's executing on something and people are like, they only care about athletics. Like, no, there might be some top-down initiatives that this is a really key part of the strategy at the moment. And so I think really having that clarity and that unity can help support that cohesion and help people feel seen, but also create space for people to advocate where maybe they are feeling underrepresented and they want to make a case for some good storytelling opportunities or be able to explore that further.
Yeah. On the last question here, I appreciate we may get just under the wire, but I have a feeling this one will have a little longer answer here. What would be your recommendation to a university that has a pre-established academic brand and is trying to bring that athletic brand into the academic brand?
First, I would look at the data and see if you need to do that. I'd look at your institutional goals, because it may be that you don't need to do that. For us, it was something that was very intentional and strategic, because we knew that it would help us achieve where we're trying to go with our admissions numbers and our affinity in our city and across our state. So do not have to do it. If what is working for you, really evaluate that and see if you need to do that. But I think that there is the piece that is always there and that is always underline is that your athletes are students first. And so there is always that connection to those two. And you can make some really authentic and great content that can support both.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would add, yes, hitting the brakes first to take inventory of what's there and seeing how people are interacting with each of those brands so that you can figure out, like, there may be different assets in the athletic space already that are getting overlooked. So part of what we do is look at owned content strategy, but we're also spending a lot of time in earned conversation spaces and look at how people are talking about your campus. So through that, there might be ways that you can even identify who are those unofficial champions or ambassadors of your athletics program too, and finding ways to collaborate or encourage or just kind of nurture those relationships further. Because you likely already have you're likely underestimating the strength of some of that athletics conversation, but there are ways to then see what's already happening, tap into that, and then work to integrate it in with some of that cohesive messaging, like having some collaborative posts, having some of that visibility across different channel spaces. And then that will strengthen both so that you can have them existing separately, but in a way that's working together efficiently and effectively.
All right. We got through it right at 2. This worked out perfectly. I just want to say thank you so much, Lauren and Kelsey. This was a fantastic conversation. I loved getting to sit down on our virtual couch here and have a chat. if there's any sort of parting thoughts you want to give, or how people can reach out if they want to follow up.
I'm always available to chat, so feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, find me, and I'd be happy to talk you through our playbook. We're just really proud of the work that we've done and all of our partnerships. And thanks to both Will and Kelsey as well for today. This was fun.
All right.
Yeah, likewise, happy to connect on LinkedIn. If you're interested too in looking at some of the data points I referenced, Campus Sonar's website has a number of these resources available for anyone to visit our page and find, but I'd be happy to share them with you if you want to send me a message on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Thanks so
And
much.
tomorrow in your inbox, you'll get a recording link that'll have links to some of these resources as well, so you can find everything in one place. The great thing about this new platform is we get some cool moments where you can go in and actually see. You want to share just one snippet that you loved Lauren said, and you know that your VP isn't going to sit and watch the whole thing, so you send just that moment. You can catch their attention that way. All right. Well, we will see everyone again. Be safe, everyone.